All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast, where you know what? As always, you're getting fucking old. I'm getting fucking old. To the audience at home, maybe some of you are getting so old that you have families. Maybe you have children.
Ugh, ugh,
I,
ugh.
I know, fucking disgusting, right? But you know what? How about you take those kids, you put them to bed, and have these man children review a movie for you so you can listen. And speaking of man children and children of men, let's get into the 2006 classic film Children of Men. Now, this is my choice for this week's movie review. Brian, let me ask you real quick. You have no experience with this movie, correct?
None. My experience with it is that over the years since it's come out, I've heard its title. I know that it's renowned by a lot of people with taste and regard. I would just kind of hear about it in the like kind of through osmosis. Knew nothing about it except for that it was supposedly very dark and very good. I came into it pretty much as blind as possible, only knowing, the little bits that you told me about its themes and content that made me intrigued by it. And I watched it actually for the first time just a few hours ago.
That's very interesting to me because this is a movie that I had, heard many people whose, once again, film opinions that I hold in very much esteem talk about
Yeah,
this movie. And I was just like, oh, interesting. It's a, 2006 film that, we'll get into it in the trivia, in the details, but it did not do particularly very, very financially well. And, I've heard it be talked about from a cinematography perspective, from various like historically important scenes and techniques that I think are now more common than they used to be, but at the time were extremely
yeah.
revolutionary while filming this film. Um,
Well, I'd say that the mid 2000s to the early 2010s, that was the nadir of my keeping up with films that were coming out, either big budget or independent films or cult films. I was only looking backwards in terms of the films that I was looking at that point.
Interesting,
Um,
because for me, I actually feel like the nadir for me was probably like the early 2010s in particular. Um,
okay,
or maybe the very early 2000s.
the the 2000s would have been the peak of my being a weird nerd who thought everything. I still think everything that's old is better, if I'm being honest, because I'm old. Um, no, but at the time that would have been me, middle school and like earlier into high school, going like, oh, I like all this old stuff that's good, and then also, as I've said before, I completely rejected most action films throughout the 2000s and 2010s for good and for ill.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. As Brian, you know this about me and I know this about you. We are just big old movie nerds. I'm particularly about the 80s.
Yeah,
I fucking love cheesy camp movies from the 80s. Always been that way.
and
And
well, now I'm more. I've gotten away from that, and I kind of see a lot of stuff coming out that I'm really excited about. But at the time this came out and the years after, it's just not something I'm going to be honest. At that age and for many years until recently, I would have thought that this looked boring and I wouldn't have wanted to watch it.
no, I totally get that. And in fact, the first time I watched this film, I remember I really liked it, but I never like I didn't really I think understand maybe the impact that it could have. I probably watched
Yeah,
it for the first time maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And I wanted to choose this film in 2023 because this film is set in 2027. And I think there's a lot of things in this film that are insanely relevant to a future that's only 4 years. Like I honestly think that the future
it looks like 4
2027,
years away.
yeah, it really fucking does.
So that's the thing is like when you told me about this movie and then watching it, I was like, this is particularly for this show. This is a really interesting choice because it's both a movie that kind of similar maybe to Drive. I hear it referenced by a similar sort of demographic in our age. Seems like it was kind of a touchstone for like cult movie nerds that are like millennials. And you look back at it and it's both very reflective of, to me, like late Bush era,
Mhm.
but they're very prescient. It's in a very strange way.
Yes, and I guess before we get in too deep into the plot, I want to go over just some of the details. So once again, this film came out in 2006. In fact, it was released on Christmas of 2006. Now,
Appropriately.
well, we'll definitely get into how aggressively Christian this movie is, because this movie is aggressively Christian. I think you and I, Brian, would both agree with that.
You weren't kidding. You had told me that before. You weren't kidding. And actually, one thing that I didn't do much research because I'm mostly interested in. I came into my viewing of the movie and then I wanted to bounce that off of what you were going to tell me about it. But one thing I did read is so it's based off of a novel,
Yes.
and Christian fans of the novel felt like this movie was not Christian enough, apparently.
Which that's insane to me. I'm sorry.
Dude,
It's absolutely insane. There's literally no way this movie could be more
it's
Christian.
a movie.
Yeah, unless Jesus himself literally walked on screen and said convert to Christianity. That's the only way it could be more Christian. I'm sorry. But yes, once again, this movie was released on Christmas of 2006 to give you any indication of how aggressively Christian this movie is. This movie was rated R. And it was directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who is a very critically acclaimed director. The screenplay was also written by him and a handful of other people who were really only known for working on the screenplay of this film, so I didn't include their filmography in here. But Alfonso Cuarón is most known for his movies such as A Little Princess, the 1998 adaptation of Great Expectations, the movie Y Tu Mama Tambien, which is a movie that I've seen or it's like a Criterion film I've seen, but I've never watched it. He also directed the fourth Harry Potter film, The Prisoner of Azkaban. And probably most famously, other than this movie, he directed the 2013 film Gravity and the Oscar award-winning film Roma. Now, speaking of Oscars, he's been nominated for a total of 28 Academy Awards and has won 10. Although he didn't
Sicko for sure.
Yeah. But he has not won. He did not win any Academy Awards for this film, but this film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards. So I remember I did tell you this might be our most critically acclaimed film we reviewed for the show so far. This movie was nominated for 3 Academy Awards.
Kind of cool because this is not. I mean, it kind of, it's kind of higher on the higher end of middlebrow, but it is like a genre film. Like it is like an action film, and so it's cool to see something like that get even noticed by the Academy. Because honestly, they aren't always.
No, very much so, and yeah, it is definitely. I mean,
it must have been a sicko.
Yeah, but post-apocalypse films are definitely a type of genre film, that's for sure. And this is definitely a higher brow post-apocalypse film than a lot of them are, but it's still a genre film by the end of the day.
Oh, you think this is you think this is in a different league than say Gamer?
I'm gonna say this movie has worse dialogue than Gamer. I'll just say that less interesting dialogue, that's for sure. But
respect.
Yeah. But this film is 109 minutes long. This movie had a budget of $76 million, but it only grossed $70.5 million. Now, I will say, I think partially the reason why this film was a box office failure is obviously, of course, the themes. 2006, even though you talked about the late Bush presidency era, but still 2006, I don't think people were as universally against Bush at this time. So having a movie that, and I also, even though this movie is aggressively Christian, it's not like conservative Christian at all. Like that is not what this film is at fucking all. So I think a film that's aggressively Christian, but not from a reactionary perspective. I don't think 2006 audiences wanted to see this, especially around Christmas time.
In 2006, how do you market to that demographic? Because I think now we have a better idea of like there's different types of Christians in the mainstream, and but Bush era, there's like the Christian right, at least publicly, and then there's like what Reddit atheists or what would become the Reddit atheists, at least as far as marketing is concerned. So if you're like just a normal studio exec, how do you market this movie? How do you market it to like left lib Christians? You don't even know they exist really at that point.
Yeah, like the fact that the movie almost made its budget back is actually kind of impressive to me, considering how unmarketable this kind of movie.
It's clearly not a small budget, also.
No, very much so. Absolutely not. And also talk about critics. This film has a 92% critic score and an 85% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. So once again, very critically acclaimed film from both sides of that spectrum.
I was checking out the the 2007, it's an end of year list, all the top 10 lists it made from various like prominent review sites and periodicals at the time, and it was wild to see it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean people fucking loved this movie when it came out. It just obviously once again was not a very marketable film for for pretty obvious reasons.
Right.
Oh, and once again, you're talking about the novel, so let's get into some trivia. In the movie, the infertility crisis is the result. I'm sorry. In the movie, the infertility crisis is the result of all women being infertile. But in the original novel, once again, it was actually titled from the original novel "Children of Men" by P.D. James. It's the result of all men producing no sperm, which I thought was very interesting, and that's actually, I think, something very relevant to our modern times because worldwide sperm counts are going down for some reason, and this is like not a joke. This is actually happening in the world.
That was in the back of my head the whole time watching this. I was like, this is a little different, but that does like cast a different shadow watching that movie now and knowing that, and just knowing that less people our age and younger, and there isn't any side of clothing are having kids. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm not doing some weird thing, but that is true. And that's not how the movie or the book portrays it, but that is like a thing that's kind of happening.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was interesting that, once again, the original novel was made in 1992. So the fact that a 30-year-old novel could predict that, maybe there could be a future fertility crisis from that is kind of interesting. Now this is a fun fact we were talking about before recording this episode, but the cover of the Pink Floyd album Animals features a floating pig above the Battersea Power Station. The quote unquote arc of the arts in this movie.
Yeah, why is that in this movie?
Yeah, it's very interesting, but
I'm sure I have an idea.
Yeah.
And this is basically so we'll get into thematically, you could maybe say that in the most general way, this movie has thematic ties to animals, which is not really, but in the general level that animals is all about everyone in capitalist society. It's a sheep, a dog, or a pig. It's very middle school and simplistic, but it's also pretty cool. So like, workers are all sheep and laborers. Corporations and companies are all dogs, and government officials are all pigs. In the most very general way of the world that the album Animals, I think it's just there because they thought it was funny to put the pig by Battersea, in the background of their movie. But I was thinking, maybe it's because they're saying like this is a bleak dystopia film, and that's how the album Animals is. It's a dystopian concept album.
And I also think it's very interesting that in real life the Battersea Power Station has been abandoned for quite some time. But I think it's interesting that in this movie, the Battersea Power Station is used as a repository for all the cultural works that will survive essentially this post-apocalypse. I think that's very interesting. So
that was one of my favorite conceits of this movie is that anything that's going to be that there's like a concentration of parts of society and culture that are going to be preserved while other things fall to the wayside. It's just a different little thing that I haven't really seen in a dystopian sci-fi thing before.
Oh no, for sure. Next fact here is this movie never explains the reason for the infertility. Of course, in this movie, women can't get pregnant, but it's never explained truly why. This has been attributed to Alfonso Cuarón's dislike for expository film. There's a kind of cinema I detest, he says, which is a cinema that is about exposition and explanations. It's become a medium for lazy readers. Cinema is a hostage of narrative, and I'm very good at narrative as a hostage of cinema. Which I'm totally fine with them not explaining why it happens in this movie.
It's not important. That's not the point of the movie.
Absolutely not. So I'm really glad they didn't waste the time to be like, so Theo, you need to hear it. And it's like nobody gives a shit.
I mean, like it's because all the women are hamming now, and they're all dyeing their hair.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Ramona Flowers ruined a whole generation of women. No, I'm not going to get into that song.
Friend of the pod, negative effects.
Yeah. Friend of the pod, negative XP, otherwise formerly known as School Shooter. But
what a twat.
Yeah, what a fucking asshole that guy is.
That's the uber pop punk guy. That's the final form of pop punk guy. That fucking
Yeah.
degenerate.
Absolutely.
All right,
Uh,
I'm done.
no, it's all good. It's all good. One of the next facts here is one of the most difficult scenes to film from a production design standpoint was the moment when Clive Owen's kidnappers take him to a room covered in newspaper. Every story on every newspaper had to be created specifically for this scene, even though they were barely glimpsed. So all
That's
those are
cool.
actually original articles that were obviously not real events, but
See, now we need to go back and like read them.
it's interesting because I just rewatched the film for the second time. I just got done maybe a half an hour before recording. And that scene where you actually see the newspapers maybe lasts like 2 minutes, if that. Probably a minute. But
Yeah.
they create articles for the whole thing, so that's actually really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then finally, my last fact here is in one of the minute-long takes, the camera got splattered with fake blood. And that's actually the scene that I think is most often talked about in regards to a filmmaking perspective, which is, and I don't want to spoil it too much until we get to that part of the plot. But during one of the battle scenes in the movie, really the most prominent battle scene, that scene lasts 6 minutes and 18 seconds, and it's all in one shot.
Which that was my favorite part of the movie. I mean, to be honest, what I overall liked about this movie, and we'll get more into it, we can talk back and forth on this, was not mostly the action, but that was like the high point cinematically for me. I'm watching it. I'm just feeling excited.
Oh no, for sure. And I did notice it on my rewatch. There is like a couple drops of fake blood on the camera, but Alfonso Cuarón actually yelled cut, but apparently due to the explosions, they totally misheard him. So the shot just kept going on, and it actually was able to be finished in one shot. So
they had the sound effect and pyrotechnics guy from Tropic Thunder on this.
Yeah.
Danny McBride.
But yeah, I mean that's the thing though, is that I actually do think that the fake blood actually adds a certain amount to that scene. Because I mean, even though it is one shot, and I think directors want to have something be very choreographed and very clinical, like actual battles aren't. They're bloody, they're messy, they're fucking.
That is a thing that happens in that moment that they couldn't undo in that shot. And I don't know. This is a pro Terra Syrup and pro Squib podcast as far as I'm sure.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, if they wanted to like throw a whole bucket of blood on the camera while it's happening, that would have probably been okay too. I would be okay with that. It might be a little cheesy in camp, but I mean, hey, whatever, it's fine. All right. So without further ado, let's get to the synopsis here. So once again, this film is set in the year 2027. After 18 years of total human infertility, war and global depression have pushed society to the brink of collapse as humanity faces extinction. The United Kingdom, one of the few remaining nations with a functioning government, is deluged by refugees fleeing from chaos in their own countries. Now, I think this is interesting. So this and a movie that came out pretty close to around the same time, V for Vendetta, have this like post-apocalypse future where the UK is somehow the only country still striving and marching on. But I think that's all propaganda. I don't believe that for a second. I think that there are other countries with functioning governments, but the propaganda department in the UK government, or whatever is still left of the UK government, is simply like driving home that so they can like foster nationalism and anti-refugee sentiment.
Who I think would agree with that sentiment is Alan Moore, author of V for Vendetta.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And the UK is of course one of the world's largest and wealthiest governments, but at the same time, I mean, they're barely surviving now. Like, let's be fucking real here. In the apocalypse, it would be turned into like Central African Republic. Let's be real. Like,
yeah.
So I mean, in the movie, there are many refugees who do flee to the UK, but there's many refugees who flee to the UK now. So I mean, it's just like, I don't really see the UK being like the one surviving government. That doesn't really make any sense to me. They don't have any significant natural resources. They're all an import fucking economy.
I hadn't even thought of that, but that's an excellent point.
Exactly. It's just, I don't know. Either way, that's I think that's the movie's propaganda saying that, but that's not here nor there.
It's not like the economy in both this one and V for Vendetta, this fictional economy, it's certainly not thriving. Like,
No, it
even
is absolutely not thriving at all.
it's the lone surviving government. It's like been reduced, kind of like in the third world, to like a developing nation.
Yeah, exactly. In this response to this mass influx, the country has become a police state. Illegal immigrants are arrested and are either imprisoned or executed by the British government. Theo Farron, played by the actor Clive Owen, watches on the news that the youngest man in the world, Diego Ricardo, was killed during a altercation. Now, I really
Honestly, if I get too far away, Clive Owen, the only acceptable British performer for me, or type of British performer, which is kind of a curt, direct, kind of working class, sort of dumb seeming guy.
yeah, that's a really good way to describe him.
I mostly, I'm sorry, guys. I know we don't have any British listeners, thank God. I don't like those voices. I don't like most of their faces. Um, but that's a genre of Brit that I fuck with. I like Clive Owen.
No, I really do like him too. Um, And I really like, so this is the opening scene of the movie. You just see him in a cafe watching the news report of the world's youngest person having been murdered in a public altercation. And then immediately afterwards, as he's leaving the cafe, and of course you see him pour in like whiskey in his coffee, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
The cafe is bombed in what is seemingly a terrorist attack. Now, that is a really fucked up scene. And I read in the trivia that apparently that scene was filmed only a couple weeks after an Al Qaeda bombing in London happened in a very similar area.
And there's, of course, of course, this is, again, this is peak Iraq war on terror eras, but also, there's echoes in this particularly of this, because later on, of like our IRA bombings and things.
Oh yes, very much so.
And I just want to, with the world's youngest man being murdered, the interesting bit to me is, according to the news program, he's murdered after refusing to sign an autograph. Yeah, and I thought that was interesting. I thought it was interesting. I wasn't sure if we were supposed to take that at face value or not. It's such a strange detail, but I really liked it.
No, I do too. I think that I think that's certainly possible that could happen, because obviously I feel like if you're the world's most prominent anything, you probably have a certain amount of celebrity to you anyways.
Yeah, of course.
And in this world that's, seemingly post-apocalypse, I mean, people are willing to fucking do anything. But after the terrorist attack, Theo leaves the office for the day. And I also do love his journey to and from work, because there's a lot of environmental storytelling going on. You see immigrants and refugees in cages. You hear multiple languages being spoken. You see the absolute poverty and devastation that is in this. Yeah, the quote unquote thriving UK. And also, interestingly enough, you also see a couple ads that are never commented upon that say something along the lines of avoiding fertility tests is a crime. So in this future where nobody's fertile, the government is still forcing people to do quote unquote fertility tests, which I think is very interesting.
That's what really worked for me about this film, was the world building in it. There's such a visceral sense of like a whole world beyond what we are seeing directly that has a feel and a lifeblood and continuity to it. Like we know without anyone having to tell us a lot about social mores in this world, a lot about what's happened in the last, I guess, 20 years since the time the film was made. And just really impressive, especially compared to other sci-fi that was coming out around that time, I think.
Yeah, and once again, this movie's very much show, don't tell. Like, I mean, there is a little bit of telling that you obviously have to do a little bit. But for the most part, I would say the vast majority of environmental storytelling is show, don't tell, very much so.
Absolutely.
But yeah, he sees the utter devastation of London around him while nationalist propaganda plays around him as well on the TV. And also another part of the propaganda is, various ads of like, oh, he's my cousin, he's my neighbor, he's my partner. It's like, oh, well, he's an immigrant and a refugee. And it's essentially in this society also considered a crime to feed, house, and employ refugees, which is, very much of a, I would say probably a throwback to the early 1900s when you couldn't fucking hire an Irish person in, the US or UK back then. I think it's very interesting to see that, that kind of be brought around to a future environment.
It's also, I mean, not that it's in the clear now, but 2006, you're still gonna get a lot of flack from a pretty big segment of audiences for having like a pro refugee sort of subtext here movie. This is, I mean, that's still a big culture issue now, but at the time it was a lot bigger. There was a lot more mainstream vitriol against immigration
Yes,
and
and this also is a very pro-refugee and immigrant film. That's why I say it's a left-wing hyper-Christian movie.
oh,
Um,
because that's and I'm sure anyone that would listen to the show or knows us, like that's clearly a Christian value. Like whether you believe it or not, it just is.
oh no, for sure, 100%. Um, we then meet Jasper, played by the actor Michael Caine. Now, Brian, I don't know if you agree. I love Michael Caine. I
I
love
love
seeing him
Michael.
in everything.
I actually okay. I have a list, a big list of potential films for the podcast, and this reminded me of one of them.
Mhm.
I love Michael Caine. I love seeing him. Um, his character. I know it's nice to have a character like that in this movie because he does add sort of a levity to it, you know. And he's got kind of an aging, like counterculture, like hippie energy to him, which
Yeah.
is I don't know,
Well, I
just
mean, uh,
nice to see.
well, of course, Brian, you love him because he's like every single old white guy in Portland.
With that, oh my God, you're right. Okay,
But they
someone's
yeah. But they both Theo and Jasper both banter back and forth about the state of the world and the state of the quote unquote Fugees to Britain. Now we're not talking, of course, about the Pros Michael and Wyclef Jean and Lauryn Hill Fugees. In this society, they're not killing them softly with this song. They're literally killing them by putting them in the concentration camps. But that's not here nor there.
ooh.
um, we then make it to Jasper's house in the outskirts of London, as we see that he was at one point an acclaimed cartoonist, and his wife, who is a former journalist, is catatonic from seeming torture while being detained, which
I,
is
I I think, and maybe he's based on someone else. Maybe he's based on no one. I think this character might be sort of inspired by Harvey Pekar, the underground comics artist who did a lot of political activism in the 70s and 80s.
okay. Interesting. Okay. Huh. I mean, of course, I'm very much familiar with Harvey Pekar. Of course, the biographic film American Splendor with Paul Giamatti. I'm very familiar with him.
He did a lot, he did a lot of campaigning against BP and Sitco, and he was actually blackballed from a lot of TV shows. And
Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. They didn't really get into that in American Splendor. It's been a while since I've seen that movie, right?
yeah, no, they don't really.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to read more about that because obviously, I love that movie. But and
Well,
also,
we'll talk Harvey Pekar off the pod. Maybe we'll do a Pekar episode someday. I can give you some American Splendor, Rex. He's my
oh no,
favorite.
shit, I would fucking do that in a heartbeat. And also during this meeting with Jasper and Theo, they talk about Quietus, which is this film's literally it's a suicide pill. Uh,
That's such a good name for a fucking euthanization pill. It's so good.
yeah, and so after their meeting where they smoke weed and listen to Aphex Twin for some reason, they, yeah, that was pretty funny to hear that.
Michael Caine is playing he's playing a millennial in this in
Yeah.
2020.
I mean, that is what millennials will look like in 2027. Let's be real here.
Yeah.
We're all gonna look like Michael Caine.
And we'll be putting an interpol for young kids and going, this is real music.
Yeah.
Panic at the Disco.
Oh shit. But after their little meeting, the next morning, we see Theo wake up to a Quietus commercial on the TV, which that's also maybe one of my favorite environmental storytelling moments in the movie, because you just see the commercial playing in the background. Ironically enough, quiet. There's no sound playing, but you just see like a man take a pill, walk into the sunset, and it just says Quietus. And then I don't know if you read the text on there, but it says $2,000 to your next of kin and refugees allowed to take.
That's so rough.
I know.
That's almost like a Mr. Show bit.
It really. I mean, to be fair, the whitest kids literally did do that skit.
Oh, you're right.
Although I don't know if it was a medication. I think it was just literally suicide.
It's just suicide, yeah.
But yes, that was a rough. Especially, I didn't actually see the refugees allowed to take until the second viewing. I'm like, oh shit, I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, rough. But yeah, once again, very good part of environmental storytelling because the first time you watch it, you probably will miss it.
Right. Well, I got the commercial. I actually did not see the refugees are to take. That's I don't know. That's very like a Philip K. Dick, like a very okay, that's dark, obviously.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. This is Taylor with a quick editor's note here. So, of course, we did mention Quietus in the scene in the Quietus commercial. Now, in the original script, I did mean to mention medically assisted dying and its possible parallels with Quietus in this movie, but I did not get around to it. Now, in Canada, medically assisted dying is used for people who are terminally ill, or at least it's supposed to be. But I think its parameters are becoming too wide and could be used for very problematic purposes. And I think it actually does have quite a bit of relevance to Quietus in this movie. Part of the reason why I wanted to review this movie in the first place. But we did not get to that in this episode. I do apologize. And anyone at home who is listening to this episode and, commented on our video talking about why we didn't get into Quietus, medically assisted dying, I definitely do know the connection. So thank you very much if you do comment that. But once again, I very much did understand the link between those two things, Quietus in this movie and medically assisted dying in Canada. So with that out of the way, let's get back to the episode. On his way to work, he is kidnapped by the Fishes, a militant immigrants' rights group led by Theo's estranged wife, Julian Taylor, played by the actress Julianne Moore. Now, this is the scene where we were talking about the newspaper clippings. That's the part earlier with the trivia. The pair separated after their son's death during a 2008 flu pandemic. Now, I looked it up. There was a 2008 flu pandemic, but it was the swine flu pandemic in the United States. So I think that was very interesting and aligned very closely with flu pandemic, although that flu pandemic was probably not nearly as fatal as this 2008 flu pandemic in the movie. Julian offers Theo money to acquire transit papers for a young refugee woman named Key, played by the actress Claire Hope Ashity. Now, Theo obtains the documents from his cousin and a very devoted Pink Floyd fan, apparently, who's played by the actor Danny Houston. Now, I thought I recognized his face somewhere, and I realized where it was from. He was the main vampire in 30 Days of Night.
Oh.
So that's where I'm like, this guy looks so fucking familiar. And I looked him up like, oh, he was from 30 Days of Night. Once again, featuring in the lead role, friend of the pod. Fuck, I can't remember his name at the moment. I'll remember it in a second. I think that was the movie that I think I said 40 Days and 40 Nights. And you thought I said 30.
Yeah.
Josh Hartnett. That's the movie. Maybe someday we'll review 30 Days of Night, because 30 Days of Night is a great movie.
I almost feel like we have to do a double feature with that in 30 Days and 30 Nights now.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Lent is upon us, but that's not even there. But his cousin is a government minister who runs a state-sponsored collection of salvaged art, and some of that salvaged art includes a Banksy portrait, as well as the one Greek statue with his dick out. I can't remember what that one's called at the moment. And then as well, of course, he owns the Battersea Power Station and the Pink Floyd pig for some reason.
Nice to see.
He stole it from Roger Waters himself.
He was like, I'm sick of your anti-Semitism.
Yeah. There's too much anti-Semitism in this Pink Floyd. I'm stealing your pig, good sir.
Like, this is what you get for being rude to Drake.
And he agrees to escort Key in exchange for a larger sum of money. We then get to a scene where Theo and Julian discuss their past as a couple and their child before departing to the city of Canterbury, or I should say rural Canterbury. We then meet Luke, played by the actor, and I'm going to fucking totally brutalize his name here, but the actor Chiwetel Ejiofor. That's the I know I fucked that up. But he did play Solomon Northrop, the main character in the Steve McQueen movie 12 Years a Slave. Um,
Oh,
which I've only seen one Steve McQueen movie, which is Hunger, but I mean that's a fucking fantastic film. So he's a great director, just from that alone. Um, but yes, and Luke
so
drives. Oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I actually had a thought, and I don't know if I hadn't come into this knowing that it was an aggressively Christian movie, if I would have thought this. But is the loss of our protagonist's child supposed to sort of denote a vague loss of faith in the character? Is that the impression you get?
Yes, very much so. I mean,
Yeah,
I didn't I didn't really describe Theo's character earlier, but he is a cynical, depressed, alcoholic bureaucrat. That's the best way I can describe Theo in this movie. He works for the like local energy department or something, and he like I said, alcoholic, depressed. He thinks the world is falling apart, which to be fair, the world is falling apart in this
he's
film.
like a former activist that's become, jaded.
Yeah, very much so, yes. So, but yes, definitely the loss of his child and the loss of his wife is very much the idea of losing his faith and losing his sort of trust and desire to see humanity prosper. Very much so. Um,
I've never been like that.
yeah. While Luke is driving to Canterbury, um, and also included in this is character Miriam, who is a midwife played by the actress Pam Ferris. An armed gang ambushes them and kills Julian. Now, I read in the Wikipedia article of this film that scene was actually also a single shot sequence. That was about a 4-minute sequence, the ambush scene where Julian dies. And that scene lasted 4 minutes and 7 seconds, which is it's a pretty impressive one-shot scene. I'll say that.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's I don't know if it was this scene. I did read that some of the scenes are very subtly edited to give the illusion of being continuous scenes, but I don't believe that's one of them. But I thought that was interesting.
I don't think that one is either, but there are definitely some that are.
I thought that was really cool because so many of the scenes do look like they're long continuous shots.
Yeah,
So whether they're not, you're kind of like, oh damn.
yeah. As they're driving away from the ambush that killed Julian, two police officers stop their car. Luke kills them, and the group hides Julian's body before heading to a Fish's safe house. All right, so while they're at the Canterbury safe house, Key reveals to Theo that she is pregnant, making her the only known pregnant woman in the world. Now, I think this scene's very interesting, Brian. So, to once again, talk about the overtly Christian themes. Um, uh, Key once again reveals to Theo that she is pregnant by unfurling her top and revealing her pregnant stomach. There's angelic music playing in the background, and Theo then proclaims, he literally says, Jesus Christ.
It's
I mean,
awesome. I was shocked when that happened. When he actually said that, and I was like, oof. It's like
yeah,
when they say the name of a movie in the movie.
yeah, I just couldn't possibly imagine a more Christian scene in a mainstream Hollywood movie. I just can't. It's just.
No.
I mean, to be fair, that's one of those where it's like, to be fair, show don't tell. That one really told. Let's be real here. Yeah. But that's
something thing where I bet it is true that mainstream cinema is very secular, and I don't mean that that's a bad thing. I tend to prefer it. But so if you are making like a Christian genre film, maybe it is like you want to have one really big gimme for the audience.
Yes, and also I think that once again we were talking about this movie, even though it is aggressively Christian, it is also like at the very bare minimum like a left liberal to like left wing movie. Because the thing is that in this movie, this once again very aggressively Christian movie, the future of humanity is laid upon a refugee of color who is presumably, because she does mention it, is probably a prostitute. That is something that obviously conservative Christians would just make them want to just go fucking nuts, like murderous rage if you told them that. Like,
even though, like, to argue that that's what's happening in the scripture, I don't need to get into it. That's so stupid. But
yeah, I mean, what wasn't Wasn't that Scorsese film essentially? Didn't they kind of indicate that Mary was a prostitute, or am I thinking
Yeah,
of something completely
that's
different?
they do. That's Last Temptation of Christ. That would potentially be a good contender for an episode at one point. I've actually been planning to do like a Scorsese series of his like non-gang films, all of his what I consider his alienation films, and it's a good one.
Yeah, but I said, I mean Christian sent death threats to Scorsese for that. So I mean the fact they made it one step further and made her a refugee of color on top of it. So
To people, when they watch this movie, they aren't gonna see that at all. They're like, unless you tell them flat out, they will just see it. They probably will miss the Christian themes completely because they'll be so mad about the pro-immigrant themes.
Oh, and trust me, and I'm gonna spoil it here. I did not put any negative reviews in the reviews because they literally all were like bigoted and hateful.
I
The
bet.
negative ones. So I did not include. I couldn't even find any funny ones. They were just all like just grotesquely bigoted, and I'm not gonna put that in the episode.
Yeah, because it's not.
Yeah,
It's a bummer to listen to.
it is absolutely. Julian had intended to hand her to the Human Project, a secretive scientific group in the Azores dedicated to curing humanity's infertility. Luke persuades Key to stay, and he is voted the new leader of the fishes. And she also decides that she wants to stay and have their baby there. That night, Theo is woken up to one of the members talking about how his brother was gravely wounded. But he eavesdrops on another conversation and learns that the fishes orchestrated Julian's death so that Luke could become their leader. Theo also hears that they intend to kill him and use the baby as a political tool to support the coming what they see as a coming revolution. Theo wakes Key and Miriam, and they escape to Jasper's house. Now they also do it in a car that is stated in an earlier scene that needs to be jump started, which I thought was was like that's weird that you decide to use that car, but okay.
Yeah, let's make it a little more tense.
Yeah. But also interestingly enough, that's also definitely another one of my favorite scenes because it is an extremely tense scene.
Yeah,
Of them trying to get away because of course it's just a pregnant woman, a middle-aged midwife, and a middle-aged fucking alcoholic trying to get away in this fucking busted down car while a bunch of militants chase after them.
yeah,
Down
absolutely.
a hill in a farmland.
Yeah.
And I also like that the scene doesn't really have any music to it either, from what I remember, right?
Yeah, no, that stuck out to me too because it feels very tense. It's just the silence of them shuffling around, and it makes every sound they make seem so loud.
Yes. That's definitely a highlight scene for me in this movie. Um, Theo, Key, and Miriam arrive to Jasper's house, and Theo seemingly walks upon what he believes is their murder-suicide. But that's not true. It's a fake out because in Jasper finds it interesting to use Quietus as a anti-rat as an anti-rat device. So he puts Quietus in the bread to kill rats, and he says it's very effective.
Awful expensive way to kill rats.
Yeah, that's what I fucking think. Like Jesus, are like I mean, in this post-apocalyptic future, are like fucking glue traps like impossible to find? Like I don't know.
Maybe the rats are like really strong. You can't kill them with like regular rat poison. I don't know. Yeah, it seems weird to me. It's a weird fake out.
It is, but in all honesty, it kind of made me laugh. I appreciated that.
I liked it.
While they're at the house, the group plans to board the Human Project ship known as the Tomorrow, which will arrive offshore at the town of Bexhill-on-Sea, disguised as a fishing vessel. Jasper suggests that they get Sid, an immigration cop to whom Jasper frequently sells drugs to, smuggle them into Bexhill as refugees. Now, I thought that was really funny because it's like, oh yeah, this cop was, well, to be fair, he's literally a concentration camp guard.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in a just world, this guy would be hung from a fucking gallows, but Jasper just sells drugs to him. I don't even know why he sells drugs to him, really. I mean, he doesn't really strike me as a guy who would really want to interact with, fascist enforcers of the state, but he's willing to sell him drugs. Just bizarre.
I guess maybe, I mean, if it's his grift, he's got to make money. I don't know.
I guess. I mean, to be fair, in this future where he is being actively persecuted. I mean, he lives in to be fair, a pretty tricked out house in the woods, but he is essentially living a fucking what's the word, a hermit's existence with his
Yeah,
catatonic wife that the state tortured. Um,
my because I was also wondering about that. Is that maybe Jasper thinks it's useful to have a contact there?
that's a fair point. Yeah.
But
So
I think we're just looking for an explanation that isn't really there or that all that necessary though at this.
I mean, it's certainly possible because, like I said, I mean, if anything were to go wrong, I mean, his house is literally the driveway of his house is literally obscured by some bushes. I mean, it's pretty easy to find this guy. Let's be
Yeah.
real. Um, but yeah, so Jasper has the idea of getting into Bexhill as refugees through the power of Sid, this camp guard. And also in between this scene, we get some dialogue with Key that I think is very interesting because she does, have some dialogue that indicates that she was possibly a prostitute or promiscuous in some way.
Yeah.
She makes a joke about how her birth is a virgin pregnancy.
That made me laugh.
So yeah, of course, this movie once again does play very directly with Christian mythology. And there's a lot of really good choice dialogue moments in those couple minutes that I don't really want to get super duper into. I would just recommend watching the movie. But I will say the dialogue in this movie is fucking fantastic. A lot of good little hidden gems in it.
Anyone who is, when we say that it's such an explicitly Christian movie, feels like that might turn them off. When I say I understand, but that really does make the movie work. It really does make, because you don't see that a lot in, left-leaning films. You don't see it a lot in sci-fi films. And it really does give a different angle, and it really gives a different way to hone in on the really, empathetic and kind of humanist like vision the movie has. They really do make it work in a way that doesn't really feel maudlin, and it feels genuine. There isn't really much doesn't seem to be an interest in like making this a movie that's supposed to inspire anyone to be Christian. It's just a way of putting out like what the filmmakers think are their values that are like good for people.
Yes, and I also think that's a reason why a lot of once again, reactionary chud Christians don't like this movie. It's because this movie's not preachy.
Yeah.
Like it just really is not. It's a movie that tells a very human story that you can make your own interpretation of, but it's not telling you to do directly to do this or that. Where chud Christians fucking love doing that.
Well, and they hate that because anytime that comes up in discussions about Christianity, they have no response for it. Really, that makes them mad because they have no counter to the fact that this is what again, that's not really what I believe, but that is like what that text says. That is fundamental to it are these values, and you don't just get to disregard them and then say that you believe in it.
Yes, 100%. The next day, the fishes discover Jasper's house, and the group is forced to flee. Jasper stays behind to stall the fishes. Now, we also do see that Jasper finally does use the quietus to kill his wife and dog, because I think Jasper is very, very clear-headed on how this is going to end for him. He is simply going to use just a last-minute stalling tactic so he can get his friend and the possible future humanity to safety.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is a very interesting scene because, of course, Luke and the gang, they rummage through his house. They find his dead wife and dog. They find plans to go to Bexhill. And there's a running gag throughout the movie that Jasper has the pull my finger gag. And he finally does it on Luke, and he shoots his hand. And in his last moment of defiance, Jasper goes, "Man, fuck you." And then it's just it's great.
It's such a good role for Michael Caine, too. Like, it's so I don't know if this part was written with him in mind, but it feels like it was. He does so good at it.
Oh yeah, I think he's probably my single favorite minor role performance in this whole movie. I love him.
Mine too.
But unfortunately, once again, he was completely right in doing his last minute stall tactic, because Luke shoots and kills him while Theo watches from a hillside. Theo, Key, and Miriam meet up with Sid, played by the actor Peter Mullen, at an old primary school. Now, this scene also has some very interesting setup for the world, because once again, Miriam was a former midwife, and in fact, at she was at the natal unit when some of the last births were done, and she describes how just a decreasing amount of women are able to carry their children and birth them and get pregnant. And she talked about how her sister used to be a midwife in Sydney, and just nice little world building there that she does. And also she has a line where it's how quiet the world is without the voices of children, which I think is also a very prescient, a very good line for this movie.
Yeah, it's a very I don't want to say I know it's a different way to think about a dystopia where it's not, for the most part, the future in this doesn't look all that different from the present unless you really look at it. What really makes this a dystopian future, at least at its depths beyond the most obvious things, is that there's a large human element missing. Not only aren't there kids, but the world in general feels very empty. Even when they're in these big cities, they feel pretty stark. And that's this movie's vision of dystopia. Is that, obviously population is decreasing and there's literally less and less life and vibrancy every day.
And to be fair, in a post-apocalyptic future that is like this, that is what the world would look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, I totally forgot about another little environmental storytelling, is that at the very beginning of the film, when Theo is walking out after he watches the news report, you actually see some of the ads in the background showing children playing, which I think is very interesting. So even in this world where literally no children exist, because the youngest person in the world is an adult, they still advertise the existence of children, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's the implication of that, I guess, is really disturbing, because is that footage that's been recycled of children from like prior eras that they're now using to sell shit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, capitalists would do that in the society. Let's be real here.
Oh, exactly.
And then we also see Key playing in a yard at this primary school, because in real life the actress, when she was in this movie, was about 18 or 19 years old, so she's essentially still a kid herself.
Yeah, she's great in this. When I learned that, actually, it kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, no, she's great in this movie. She really is. But once again, they finally meet Sid, played by the actor Peter Mullen. And it's interesting. So the code word that Jasper says to call Sid is fascist pig. And you see him get out. It looks like he's about to beat Theo. And then at the last second, he takes a baton and just starts laughing. And he's like, oh, I'm just fucking around. And to be fair, in this future, this would literally be the perfect guy to do this. Let's be real here. Like, a fucking bro-ish kind of like, middle-aged to maybe slightly younger guy who just does what he's told. Who's not a very intelligent guy. He just does what the fuck he's told.
Yeah, he doesn't think about it. He's, consciously apolitical. He's just,
Yeah, you just got to do what you got to do to survive. I mean, you know what I mean? As he's like literally beating refugees into a fucking concentration camp. And the actor, Peter Mullen, is once again a fantastic portrayal of this type of person in this movie. Holy shit. He is at the same time a guy who if you went to a bar in fucking rural Oregon or Wisconsin, you could probably strike up a conversation. And then the next day he's going up and just beating the fuck out of people in prison. Like that's.
Well, what's interesting,
he can very much compartmentalize the monstrosity. He's very good at compartmentalizing that.
That's just his day job. That's not who he is. He just gets his check for being a monster.
Exactly.
But one of the things so one of the primary influences I read for the film and novel for this vision of the future, I guess, is Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange. That's interesting to me though, because it's almost the human element is almost opposite. Where everything in Clockwork Orange is so violent and hedonistic and hypersexualized and drug-fueled. Humans in this future, they're almost numbed down to nothing. They have no experience. And I think this character is a really good example of that. He has no really strong convictions, positive or negative. He's just sort of a psycho.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get into it later. He also has his own motivations for getting money as well. I mean, that's the reason why he he allows Jasper to sell weed to him, and so he can make money on the side selling it to the refugees in the camp. But once again, Sid helps them board a bus headed to Bexhill, now converted into a refugee camp. Now, as we talked about before, once again, a guy who just goes along to go along, doesn't have many convictions about him, and is just a very, very sort of willfully ignorant little tyrant. And the dialogue in that scene where they're driving to the camp is really fucking haunting to me, because like he gets out and he's like, okay, put on your refugee face, give me a big frown, and it's horrifying.
And he's kind of in that moment with them. He's perceiving himself. He's like being likable and he's being personal. But the same guy, probably beats these refugees like to death, or.
Oh no, for sure, no quite. I mean, even as he's quote unquote, even though he's quote unquote helping these people for whatever reason, he still has to like basically tacitly threaten them to stay in line.
Yeah, he thinks it's funny as shit. It's a big lark to him. He's look at me. I'm the guy that is in charge of these people, and I control if they live or die, and I'm letting these ones in. That's the undercurrent of it.
Ooh, it's rough. There's literally millions of those type of cops in America.
Oh yeah,
and also like, probably in Britain too. But on the bus into Bexhill, Key begins experiencing contractions. Miriam distracts a guard by feigning religious mania and is taken away. Not seen in the movie after this, and presumably, I assume she's probably executed. Now, this is also maybe the single most horrifying bit of environmental storytelling, because you just see, as the bus is going into the concentration camp, you see various refugees getting, strip searched with dogs and fucking like with like batons. You see one guy who's being forced to do the Abu Ghraib pose with the fucking hood over his head. You see dead bodies being carried out for however they died. It's just horrifying watching it. And you literally just drive by it. You literally just drive by it.
As much as the images too, I suppose the sound mixing in this is really good, because you hear these screams, these muffled cries, and it's all very faint. It's very in the background. It's not obtrusive to the dialogue, and it's just sort of the ambient noise when you're in the camp. It's just this sound of people screaming or crying or violently yelling. We presume with our the guards or whatever, and it's constantly there. That's like the ambient default of these things, and it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really get really moved by scenes a lot, but that one actually, like, yeah, really fucking just struck me to my core. Like, it just, I will say, I will say, if you're faint of heart from actual like human like atrocity perspective, I would maybe play a little trigger warning for this movie, because there's some pretty hard to watch scenes in this movie.
And it's also a thing though that I don't know if the audience, I think the audience this movie was going for was, pretty much like, kind of the people that made it, was maybe left-libs who maybe would be interested in the Christian subtext. And I don't know how often those people see those images, either in film or in the real world. And I kind of wonder if that's why they're included.
Yeah, I mean,
it's exploitative,
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I mentioned the whole guy doing the Abu Ghraib pose thing. I mean, this movie did only come out like 2 years after people found out about Abu Ghraib.
Exactly. So, and it's it's not like they're showing us these salacious, gross, fictionalized things. They're showing us real things that happen for the most part to the people they really happen to in the world, which is like non-white people and immigrants and things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really dramatized. It's just literally shit that happens.
Yeah,
it's probably literally happening right now as we speak.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you make this movie, and if you put it in your sci-fi movie, then you can kind of maybe put it in your movie without a bunch of fucking freaks who get mad anytime you talk about anyone suffering, and by which I mean like right-wing people and bigots. You can say, well, this is a sci-fi dystopia. It's not really. It's just kind of, in this instance, it's kind of the world we live in.
Yeah, I mean, shit. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough for sure. And once
genocide sucks. Personally, I don't like it.
Yeah, me neither. I hate it too. It's really horrible shit.
I'm gonna say, I think I can speak for both of us when I say this is anti-concentration camp program.
I am very much too. Outside
Not
of
God.
the only concentration camps I would be okay with, and these would only be re-education camps, are for the chuds who vehemently disagreed or put like 1-star reviews for this movie on Amazon. They absolutely deserve to be put in concentration camps, but for different reasons.
I feel like, I mean, even if you just like action movies or sci-fi dystopia movies, it's like there are people in my life who I used to be close to who are like right-wing chuds, you know, who still would like this movie just because they like sci-fi action. And I feel like it's weird that you couldn't even at least find those people who are like, well, I don't really agree with the politics, but it's a neat movie.
Yeah, I mean it's ooh, and like I said, if you don't like this movie for whatever perspective, that's totally fine. But
Yeah,
the reason that all the reason that people did 1-star reviews are like just literally just the scum of the earth. Those type of fucking people.
this is a
Like,
movie that's kept making me aware that bad things happen to immigrants, and I don't like that.
yeah, this movie treats refugees and immigrants like people. How dare you, movie? Jesus, yeah, it was rough. But yeah, let's get back to plot synopsis. Sorry,
Yeah,
no, it's all good. Once Theo and Key make it inside the camp, they meet a Romani woman named Marichka, played by the actress Oana Pelia. Now, I just put her in there because she is a fairly prominent role at the end of the film, but she has literally nothing in her filmography of note other than this movie.
interesting.
Who provides a room where Key gives birth to a baby girl. Now, Brian, would you say this movie has some maybe nativity elements to it, you think?
You know, I feel like, I might even say that it's, yeah, the story of, you know, a mother and child and, a spirit of salvation. You might even say.
There's also
I
an
mean,
animal in there for some reason. I don't know. That's kind of interesting to me.
I think that's an original concept of the film. I
Yeah.
think the film is invented this.
But as we are slyly talking about here, this is obviously a scene of giving birth to Jesus Christ. That's definitely the allegory that this is trying to do. And interestingly enough, Brian, this was also another one-shot take. This was a 3-minute and 19-shot take where he gives birth to the baby while Theo observes, and I think he does a pretty good job considering he has no medical training. But but yeah, she finally gives birth to and also earlier in the film, she believes it's a baby boy, but it actually ends up being a baby girl. I know once again we should not.
Just like Jesus.
Yeah. I think also I wouldn't be surprised if Chuds got mad because Jesus in this movie is a baby girl now.
I met God, she's black.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The next morning, Sid finds his way into the house here and tells Theo and Key that war is broken out between the British military and the refugees, with the fishes leading the latter. Now you think like, wait, Sid is in the concentration camp. Why is he in the concentration? Also dressed up like an Arabic person, which I think is pretty funny. So he's just literally able to infiltrate the place dressed up in various ethnic costumes. What is he fucking?
There like a python costume, yeah.
Yeah, what is he fucking Justin Trudeau? You just can't wear those costumes. Come on, man. You got to be fucking Prime Minister of Canada to do that. But
Use that as a tribute to their great culture.
yeah. But it's like, oh, why is Sid here? Well, Sid learns that Theo and Key have a bounty on their heads and attempts to capture them. And also, it's another thing is that the media and the government are very well aware that these people are wanted fugitives. We didn't mention that earlier, but now Sid learns it because he watches TV with his mom who is dying of cancer. Which he's just such a sweet guy. He lives with his mom and takes care of her, and then he brutalizes immigrants during the day. I mean, no, he's just a nice little guy,
Similar to an old character on the podcast, our friend Ronnie.
Yeah. Yeah. He does brutalize immigrants in that movie. That is very true. And he attempts to capture them. Sid does. Theo is able to subdue Sid with Marichka's help, and they all escape. Now, interestingly enough, there's a shot in this scene that's actually reminiscent of a picture from the Holocaust, where they're trying to get through the door and it's blocking the way. That's actually a pretty famous scene of the Holocaust, which they reference in that moment. So I thought that was very
Which
interesting.
I think you could maybe, I'm sure there's cases people that don't like it. I think, again, I think the way that this movie handles that content and that subject matter is so like genuine and so like harrowing that I don't really have any issue with that.
No, I don't either. And it's also once again a movie that is I think very respectful of that legacy. I think they do a very good job of showing it. Once again, this movie does very much humanize immigrants and refugees. It doesn't just use them as a political prop or something like that. It's a movie that has a lot of humanity to it. So yeah, I don't have any issues with them referencing that at all, of course. And then at some point when they escape, Marichka takes them to another hideout where they're able to get a boat. And I think this is interesting. So this is also, I think, in reference to an earlier scene where they show the person in this part of the refugee camp also has pictures and medals and everything, just like Jasper and his wife did earlier in the movie. Although in this scene, this guy is clearly an old Soviet citizen of some sort because he has like a medal from Vladimir Lenin and stuff like that. Do you think Chuds maybe got mad that a minor protagonist in the movie was a communist?
I don't think that any of those people were watching this movie by that point.
I don't think so. I don't think so either. But still, I thought that was interesting too.
It would have been cool if he'd had like one of the golden Reddit robot statues, like Violent Acres had.
Yeah. But yes, they were able to procure a boat. Now, they make it out to the boat, but unfortunately, they are caught by the fishes. And the fishes, once again, led by Luke, because Luke also makes it up to them. They still plan on getting Key out of there to use her as a tool for the revolution instead of bringing her to the Human Project. And they also surmise that just because this camp is in now full-on rebellion, that somehow a baby... And also, I love the flawed logic. Like, oh yeah, this black immigrant had a baby, the revolution will happen. I just don't understand the thought process. It makes no sense.
That's a very left-lived thing.
Yeah, it's very much like a propaganda of the deed kind of thing.
Yeah.
Although not a violent propaganda of the deed, just directly from a baby being born. But it is a very propaganda of the deed thing. I'm like, Julian's plan of getting her to the Human Project so they can make more people makes a lot more motherfucking sense. It just does.
Yeah.
But in the scene, one of the chauffeurs was killed, but there's some shelling and everybody gets dispersed. And the fishes take Key to a building where Theo tracks them down. Now, this is the scene I was talking about earlier, the battle scene. This is once again, over 6-minute scene that's all in one shot where Theo goes hundreds of feet from one fucking part of the battle to the other. There's explosions going on. There's people being shot. It's just a magnificent piece of filmmaking that is honestly one of the best scenes in cinema history. It's incredible.
It is. I mean, it is quite literally the whole movie's leading up to it. But also one of the things is, this is an action movie. I've described it as such. Anything you read about it will describe it as that. They're actually, up to this point, there isn't a lot of what I would call action in it. But this scene really, I don't know. They're pulling out all of their tricks. And it's so choreographed. It's stylized. It's also rough to watch. It's not really graceful looking.
No, it's very brutal. It's very brutal. But yeah, once again, that's a fantastic scene. I would really recommend looking up on YouTube to the audience at home. It's a great fucking scene.
I mean, but to be honest, if you're that interested in the scene, don't look it up on YouTube. Just watch the movie.
That too. But that too. If you don't want to spend the $4 to watch this movie on Amazon or whatever, then just watch the scene on YouTube. But I would still just recommend watching the movie.
You'll like this scene if you watch by itself, but you'll like it so much more. Obviously,
Yes, very much so. Theo, throughout after the battle scene, is able to confront Luke, who is killed in an explosion. And Theo escorts Key and the baby out. Now, during this, there's the baby is crying, obviously. People hear the crying, and as Key is being let out by Theo, the surviving members of this building and even the British military are literally awed by the baby's existence, literally stop fighting so they can escort the baby out of the building, which I think is a Obviously not a very realistic scene, but it is a very symbolic scene, of course.
Yeah,
But I did enjoy that scene. I thought it was very beautiful in a way.
it's just nice, and it's I mean, this is again, I agree. I remember thinking, I don't know if these guys have been conditioned to hate the idea of babies existing would be so quick to be in awe of that. But even as like a non-religious person or whatever, I still find it really resonates. 'Cause, again, like the whole theme of this movie, right, is the perseverance of human nature through empathy and caring for each other. Like, that sounds hacky, but that really is what it is, and it articulates that really explicitly, and it shows us like the consequence of not doing that, which ultimately is these horrible deeds of violence and alienation to each other.
Yes, exactly. But after they're escorted out of the building, Marichka leads them to the boat, but chooses to stay behind as they depart. Now, that probably wasn't a very smart idea because immediately after, British fighter jets conduct airstrikes on Bexhill, probably killing everybody in there, including, I would assume, a lot of British soldiers too.
Good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance to them, of course. R.I.P. to the glorious freedom fighters. Also, at one point, Theo and Key are going through the crowd, and there's an entire procession of what I assume, well, I mean, they are Arabic fighters chanting Allahu Akbar, which that's also another part of the movie that Chuds probably hate is the people uprising against are very clearly Arabic.
Oh yeah, and I think before I meant to bring this up earlier, and I will get well. We always talk about new metal movies on the podcast, and I think we should continue alluding to other types of genres of music that the movies we watch are. But this is the most prog rock movie we have watched on this.
It is a very prog rock. I mean, the movie, of course, literally does reference visually Pink Floyd.
It has a Kate Gibson in it. It has Radiohead in it.
Oh yeah, that's true. I totally forgot about the soundtrack. Also, interestingly enough,
but also just that it's dystopia with Christian undertones, and it's kind of like lefty, but also kind of vague and just about empathy. Like it's such a 70s prog concept album of a movie.
Yeah, and also this is not a prog scene at all, but during the scene where Miriam is taken away, presumably once again to be killed, and you see all the atrocities happen, there's a Libertines song playing in the background apparently.
Yeah.
Which they're not prog rock, but I thought that was a very interesting thing to point out too.
They're an old millennial band though. That's a band for old millennials.
Oh, very much so.
When I was like 18, 17, I thought Pete Doherty was so fucking cool. I don't think that now, but I did.
Yeah. On the boat, Theo reveals that he was shot and wounded by Luke earlier. He also teaches Key some very basic maternal skills like burping her baby. Now, of course, once again in this movie, nobody knows how to take care of a baby. They just don't. So
it's knowledge, yeah.
And also Key decides to name her daughter Dylan after Theo and Julian's lost son. We then see Theo.
What are some of her early names that she's considering?
One was like Froley, which I looked it up was apparently just a made up name. One was Bazooka.
Bazooka.
And the final scene, Theo loses consciousness as the Tomorrow boat approaches. And as the screen cuts to black, children's laughter is heard. And that is the movie. Easily our longest synopsis, because there's a lot of shit that happens in this movie.
It's a dense movie.
It is a dense, as we said earlier about Run, Ronnie, Run. It's just so dense. There's just so much going on in every frame.
Which is also a Christian movie.
Yes, very much so. And so yes, that is the movie. Now, and before we get into the Amazon reviews, Brian, do you have any final thoughts before we get into them?
Like I said, this is not a movie that if I had just seen, especially for the first few years after it came out, I would have paid much mind to. It still falls into a lot of the things about action and dystopian films from that era that don't readily appeal to me. It's very militaristic. It's very gray. There's a lot of shaky cam on the action. Just because that's just how, to my way of thinking, that's how fight scenes that weren't in superhero movies looked at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, well, when I first started the movie, and I was kind of like, all right, it looks very drab, and it's like this. But once I was enveloped into the world, it felt very appropriate. The actual world building in this movie, and again, like just these themes, not even Christianity, although it is a Christian movie. Don't let anyone tell you it's not. But just of like empathy and of this general sort of idea of that people can be good to each other and overcome this horrible side of human nature. It is resonant, and it does make the kind of drabness of this world feel like it's meaningful. It's not just like a post Dark Knight kind of bullshit thing, which is a lot of what I don't like about action movies from the time period.
Mm-hmm.
The world it puts you in, I don't know, it's very full, it's very textured, and there's a lot of light just in the performances and in the dialogue and character interactions throughout this movie. It's not a slog to watch, even though it's long, and it is serious, and it is a bleak future. That's the whole point of it, is that it's a bleak future, and we still can find nice things, and there are nice things in all of these characters, and it's a very sincere movie, which I don't always like, but in this case, it did work for me. The action in this movie, it's not, with the exception of the climax scene, which is just really enthralling to watch and really tense and really satisfying after everything we've seen, is kind of for me. But the world around it and just the themes that we're following and the things we're watching unravel, really engaging and pretty moving for me.
Yes, I could not agree more. And the only thing else I can think of to add is that if you are a Christian person with a focus on social justice, I would definitely recommend putting this in your rotation of films to use as messages of like, good Christian films. Once again, this movie's not preachy. I think it has a good message of, sort of hope and humanity. It is once again very much directly based off of Christian mythology and theology,
Yeah,
without being
it's
blatant. And it's just once again just an extremely well made film with great performances, great action sequences, incredible editing. It's not overly long. It's just. I mean, when I said I think this is maybe the single best overtly Christian film ever made, I think it's very much in the running for that, if
yeah.
it's not the very top.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, those are my final thoughts. I would 100% recommend watching this film, like no question. Like, the only way I could possibly imagine is if you have issues watching, scenes of, very much people getting brutalized in ways that isn't cheesy, because it's not cheesy in this movie. It is very like viscerally like tough to
Yeah.
watch. And if that's something you can't watch, then I would not recommend. But if that's something you can stomach in a movie, I would recommend watching it to everybody else. Um,
This is an entry into the great, dystopia or post-apocalypse films. I think you can safely say that in the more modern end of it, this is one of the better ones and one of the more essential ones.
exactly. I would 100% agree with that. And then speaking of, let's get into some Amazon reviews. Now, once again, as I said many times earlier, I've only put positive ones because all the negative ones were bigoted and hateful. So if you have a negative thought about this movie that's not bigoted and hateful and you post it on Amazon, maybe I'll put it in when I'm editing this episode. But until then, there's only going to be positive reviews. I do apologize.
Well, to
Uh,
be honest, it's I mean, and if anyone is listening to this and you have like a constructive criticism of this movie, because we like to include them, I would have to say I know it's tailored as constructive criticism, but I think we like to hear, you know, all these different thoughts on movies to review. If you didn't like this movie and you have like an actual like thing to say about it, like I'd like to hear it, because it sucks that the only people that we hear that aren't representing that are just these pieces of shit.
yeah,
To be
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, to the audience at home, I mean, if you have any opinions on any of the films we review, put it in the comment section. Seriously, I read the comments. I really
I
read the comments.
I gave them permission to tell us their opinions on this movie and this movie alone.
Yes.
Don't want to hear what they think about Tom Laughlin.
Yes. And I don't want to hear your opinions on Observe and Report. Ronnie is perfect. And also Run, Ronnie Run is perfect. I'm sorry. I had to
Yeah,
put that
no,
out there.
Also, don't want to hear anything about gamer unless you are a gamer.
A capital G gamer. I want that to be clear. Um, I also do think it's funny that you've now chosen two movies that have the main character be named Ronnie.
It's about my. Oh, that's true. Damn it! Now I need to look more. I have to find a third one and complete the trifecta.
Yeah. You can find a 2000s comedy film that has Ronnie in it as a main character.
Those are both. Yeah, I do. Shit. Oh, I mean, it could be Anchorman.
Oh yeah. Oh hell yeah, dude.
Ooh.
Yeah, we talked about it last episode. We fucking might as well.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's get into some reviews here. The Amazon reviewer JJ gives this film 5 stars, and the header of his review says, "My favorite movie of all time." They say, "The first time I watched Children of Men, I was somewhere between the ages of 12 and 15. I didn't really know what I was in store for, but my young mind was taking on a tense dystopian future that gave me just enough info to be invested in the world. A bit more information in the elaborate set design and a whirlwind tale of betrayal, danger, sacrifice, and survival, and at the core of the movie's message is life. I rewatched the film for the first time in over a decade tonight, and it was a little slower, but every bit worth another viewing and reminded me why I still consider this film one of the greatest I've ever seen. Children of Men has a lot of messages in it. The beauty of life, wrapped up in the ugly mess that is humanity, politics, power, and the never-ending trudge that can be the day-to-day despair many of us encounter. All of these messages are expressed through flawed and interesting characters. No one is truly good, and no one is truly evil. All these characters are trying to make it in a world that has sacrificed peace and harmony for the sake of survival. I put Children of Men up there with other great sci-fi dystopian films such as Soylent Green, Planet of the Apes, 2001, and Interstellar. What I believe gives this film
very basic taste.
Yeah, that's fair.
I agree with this review. Those are all great movies. I'm just being a dick.
No, it's all good. What I believe gives this film the edge over those other greats is the heartfelt messages about humanity and our eternal battle between the hopefulness of faith and the, at times, all too harsh reality of chance. If you were looking for a dystopian science fiction film with a world you can get invested in, a movie more focused on telling a story and letting your feelings occur naturally versus telling you how to feel, a movie that will make you ask a few questions about yourself and the rest of the flawed mass of us that make up humanity, then this is the film for you. I truly hope those who watch it enjoy it. But in the spirit of the film, even if you don't, that's fine too. Our humanity is the collection of our flaws as well as positive attributes. I thought that was a pretty solid review.
Yeah.
It was also, I think, maybe the single highest approved review of this movie. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was.
It's thoughtful. It's I don't know. I can't. The only reason that I call this guy's taste in dystopian films basic is because I like generally much stupider, much more aggressively stupid dystopian films. I like Total Recall.
Exactly, but yeah, good review there from JJ. And also, interestingly enough, all the reviews I have are from Amazon reviewers with just their first name. So next one here is from Ed, who gives
no one else backwards.
Yeah, they're all like Prince. They're all this one name pseudonyms, but Ed gives this film 5 stars, and they say Children of Men is sci-fi at its best. They say this film was made in 2007. That's wrong. It was actually released in 2006, but that's okay. And I watched it for the first time in 2018. I have no idea why I waited so long, but in spite of the passage of time,
you wouldn't just say wrong. It was released in 2006.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a pedant here. But in spite of the passage of time, Children of Men doesn't feel the least bit dated. If this movie had been released last week instead of 11 years ago, once again, this movie was reviewed in 2018, or this review was, nobody would have suspected a thing. Not only is the movie's concept still very relevant, but its direction is done with such intelligence and sensibility that it takes on a sort of timeless quality. I also agree with that very heavily. As the lead, Clive Owen plays a tough but charming cynic who is unexpectedly enlisted in an idealistic crusade to rescue humanity from itself. This he does to near perfection, whether he's delivering a sardonic remark or subtly communicating a range of emotions through his body language. The script is full of funny, intelligent, and thoughtful lines, and the massively talented cast delivers every one of them, big and small, with gravitas and dedication. The movie's sets immerse you deeply in a gritty dystopia while cleverly juxtaposing order with chaos in a way that blurs the lines between the two. In short, I loved everything about this movie. With skill directing, a highly intelligent script, an endearing cast, and superb sets, Children of Men is a movie that deserves a place in the annals of science fiction history. I once again entirely agree with that review. I think that. Oh yeah, sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
Sorry to just I feel like maybe we didn't touch on it enough. But they made a point of saying the performances they really are like sparkling in this. And it's a lot of cast of largely people like Taylor, you were saying, haven't done that much. But I know it's very human feeling. It's not exactly naturalistic. But every line does have like personality in it, which I was glad that this person was because I think we kind of glossed over that maybe.
Yeah, except for Clive Owen, Julianne Moore, and Michael Caine. Basically, everyone in this movie is just like a long running what's the word I'm looking for? Like a character actor.
Yeah.
Like they're not known for anything outside of being in just a shit ton of projects that were all usually pretty small to mid-sized budget projects, except for once again Clive Owen, Julianne Moore, and Michael Caine. And yeah, exactly. Every single one of these performances in this movie are great. I also do think Luke, once again played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. Once again, that's my best pronunciation. I do apologize. I probably fucked it up. But this was one of his first major movies, and he's fucking great in this movie too as Luke. And yeah, the fact that he would go on to be in another extremely critically acclaimed movie, 12 Years a Slave, is just, if this was his launching pad, he did a pretty good fucking job. So yeah, that was Ed's review. Now, lastly, let's get to the other single name person who reviewed this movie, Hector. He gives this film 5 stars, and the header of the review says, "Great movie for those who appreciate cinema as art." He had to capitalize those words, so I just had to yell them, just like how Gino does in the Chris Chan documentary. But the body of the review says, "This is one of the best technically made films ever. It has minimal edits and features some of the longest apparent single takes you will ever see in a mainstream Hollywood movie." That is also aggressively true. In fact, so I looked up some more trivia that I didn't put in this episode, but the studio was extremely hesitant to do those single shot takes, especially.
I bet.
They did not want to do it. In fact, they were pretty much ready to drop him from the project, but he was just willing to just put the fucking, put his money where his mouth is. And Mr. Cuarón, you did a great job. So good for you on that. Next part of the review says, "The director and company also created one of the best single shot scenes taking place in a car." That was the ambush scene. "They had to build an entire camera rig inside and on top of the real moving vehicle to get the shot. They adjusted the seats so that they could move in and out of the frame to make way for the camera as it moves in real time without edits around the entire interior of the vehicle." There's even a YouTube video on how they made the shot, as well as other videos declaring it one of the single best single take films in history. And amazingly, that actors managed to pull off the scene. So it really is a moment worth remembering in cinema history. I'm writing this because I, for one, really appreciate cinematography and the technical aspects of filmmaking, and often I find it hard to glean from reviews whether or not a movie will be worth watching for its technical merits. So if you are also into the technical aspects, then you will love watching this film, guaranteed. Now, interestingly enough, talk about the single take. So yeah, definitely in big budget Hollywood movies, the idea of doing single take scenes in mainstream movies in 2006 was very much unheard of. That was not a thing that happened. And in fact,
assumes that people don't notice them, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there are a lot of movies that very much do incorporate single shot scenes in them, such as 1917, but those are very much camera trickery. I mean, there are a lot of scenes in 1917 that are one shot, but they still very much stitch them together to make them look more cohesive than they actually are. But I think this movie really did start that trend of directors taking chances and doing that. So I mean,
just know they had to fight for it too.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a reason why this movie was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Cinematography and Best Editing. Now, for whatever reason, I don't know what fucking movie beat those that year, because I just could not. Was there a movie released in 2006, 2007 that had better cinematography or editing than this movie?
No, I refuse to believe it.
Yeah, I just can't think of it. In fact, I'm looking at the Academy. I mean, of course, the Academy Awards is not the be all end all. Oh, okay, fair enough. So the winner that year of Best Cinematography was Pan's Labyrinth, which, to be fair, is a great movie.
Yeah,
that's also a movie that I would be willing to put as an episode of my choice.
I would be okay. So if we make and I'd be so happy to do Del Toro episodes, and they make him a regular rotating figure, kind of like we spend like.
Okay, and apparently the best editing went to The Departed. I completely disagree with that. I think Children of Men has better editing than The Departed. But yeah, for Pan's Labyrinth, I would say this movie and Pan's Labyrinth are pretty similar levels of quality for cinematography for me.
Agree.
But yeah, best editing, absolutely not.
Labyrinth.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely best editing. The Departed absolutely does not have better editing than this movie. I'm sorry. And once again, the other Academy Award that this was nominated for was Best Adapted Screenplay, which that year also The Departed won. I completely fucking disagree with that. I think the screenplay for The Departed is extremely overrated.
I like The Departed, but I don't think it's like a great work of art. I think it's more like a fun, cool, kind of doofy neo-noir film. I don't think it's like a beautiful film the way I think this and Pan's Labyrinth are, for sure.
No, and also, I think it should just be disqualified because it's a remake. I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, maybe.
And also, maybe a hot take, and I've had people disagree with me on this. I think Infernal Affairs is better than The Departed.
I haven't seen it.
I like Infernal Affairs. That's the original movie that Departed was based on. But Infernal Affairs, in my opinion, is a lot better than The Departed. I enjoy that movie a lot.
Maybe I should watch Infernal Affairs and then watch City on Fire. You seen City on Fire?
Yeah. Oh, that's the
Reservoir Dogs is based on.
No, I did not know that was based on a novel. You said it was based on a novel?
Oh, a movie. It's based on a Hong Kong action film.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, Infernal Affairs is also a Hong Kong action movie. So and it's also a trilogy. There's the Infernal Affairs trilogy. I have seen all the trilogy, and I think they're really good.
I gotta get on. I've actually meant to see it forever. I like The Departed, but I don't think it's on the same level, just thematically or technically, that this or Pan's Labyrinth are.
No, for sure. All right, so that is the episode here. Do you have any final thoughts before we conclude this review?
No, I think that pretty well wraps it up. I think I'd be interested in, if anyone listening can think of any, if you can think of any other kind of like leftist, like Christian or leftist religion in general, like explicitly religious kind of like left-leaning movies, anyone at all, that's a topic I'm pretty interested in. Over the last couple of years, I've started reading a few different philosophers who write about the intersections of different leftist and socialist thought and like different religions. And yeah, if anyone can recommend any movies in that wheelhouse, because when you told me that this is like a kind of a leftist Catholic movie, I was immediately intrigued. That's definitely something I'd like to revisit more of in future episodes.
Yes. And also when I said, aggressively Catholic. So, I mean, this movie is, of course, just aggressively Christian, but I think distinctly this is an aggressively Catholic movie.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Catholics are literally not even the largest plurality. They're just the largest Christian. The majority of Christians are Catholic. So, I mean, just by extension, it's going to be a Catholic film. But Alfonso Cuarón is, I assume, Catholic.
Why do you assume that?
That's a good point. I think it's probably because he made a based Christian film, and based Christian films Protestants are very bad at doing that. They don't do that at all.
Yeah, that's
Their Christian films, are objectively terrible.
yeah. Well, Catholicism is all about guilt and pain and denying yourself things and sacrifice for the greater good. So of course those themes lend themselves to a great dystopian action film. Okay, you can see the correlation there.
Exactly. Yeah, like Protestant Christian films are literally like, they have the budget of, I don't know, the budget of a local theater production in Texas. They're terrible. Protestant Christian films, they're like God's Not Dead. Bad movies.
We could watch that Christian rom-com where the Republican soldier and the liberal, waitress and
Purple Hearts.
Oh, it was so good. Started watching it and I liked it so much that I had to turn it off, and I had to be like, I gotta watch this with Taylor because I love it so much. Not because it was difficult to watch, because it made me want to bite my tongue off.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I'm looking up on his Wikipedia article. It doesn't mention anything about him being religious necessarily. But yeah, the reason I thought he was Catholic if he was a Christian denomination is because he made a based Christian film, a based quality Christian film. Because like I said, I don't think Catholics have like a monopoly on making good religious films, obviously. But if you're a Christian and you make a good Christian film, you're almost exclusively Catholic. Let's be real here.
This movie is specifically, and it centers not just around Christianity, but around the concept of the mother and child, of the nativity. That's important to all types of Christianity, but particularly to Catholicism, of course.
Exactly. So that's why distinctly I thought it was Catholic. But that's neither here nor there. Once again, as Brian said earlier, if you have any suggestions for good Christian movies to review, put them in the comments section. I would 100% love to hear that. Straight up.
Yeah, because I don't know if I don't think.
And they can be, in my opinion, they can be a little reactionary, but not like Amazon reviewer reactionary.
Right.
They could be a little conservative, but not like reactionary chud conservative. And speaking of, Brian, I won't tell you what it is right now, but for my next choice, I'm definitely going to do something that is far less bleak. I'm actually going to do like a kind of uplifting, funny film for my next choice. But then after that, I'm going to go for a reactionary, really ugly, dirty film that I think you will actually like quite a bit. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but that'll be like a month from now. So but yeah, so that is all my takes. This will be Taylor signing off here.
This is Brian.
All right, have a good night and keep fighting the good fight, as my friend Evan once said.
I gotta go to bed. I'm millennialed out.
Yes. Oh, and also one last thing. Sorry. You can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com.
And follow me at John Stab. That's JONSTABB. I stole the name from a dead punk rock singer.
Hell yeah. That is the punk equivalent of stealing someone's social security number after you escape from jail. So
stealing punk valor.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, team.